What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for joining me today. My name is Itai. Today I'm going to be going over all of the quarterfinal matches of the day, starting with Hafthor against tfblade. Let's begin right now. So tfblade starts with the white pieces, and he plays a very different and unique London system opening, because usually in the London system, you focus very quickly on developing this knight rather than developing this knight. And the reason for that is that usually you're going to end up playing c3, and so your b1 knight usually goes to d2. So putting a knight here with a d4 move is not the best choice, but it still has some positives to it, because you can try to maybe target c7. So there are a couple of opportunities here, which maybe is why this move is very strong. It stops this targeting from ever really happening. So the game just continues normally, and you'll notice that even at this point, the g1 knight hasn't been developed, which is super rare in the London. You take out your bishop, and usually you take out your knight in the next move. Or maybe you can play this and then take out your knight, but usually you're going to take out your knight quickly. But that's not the case in this game. In fact, even on this move, only now you see tfblade taking out their knight. Here, there's a very interesting idea, which is moving the knight to e4, because you are obviously allowing white to take your queen, but you're obviously hitting white's queen as well. So that's exactly what Hafthor decided to do. They traded queens here, and in the end of it, it seems like black has a nice structure here, but at the same time, because of all of these white pawns, or pawns on the white squares, all of these darker squares are very much open for the knight to maybe try and come here to an outpost. So although this looks very strong, it does have a lot of weaknesses that come with it. Finally, white castles. The rooks try to get activated because there's no real pieces. A lot of trades happen very early on. The second that the queen is traded, you transpose into something that's more like an endgame, and so that's kind of when you want your rooks to step into the game, and maybe even starting to bring your king into the game as well. Some pawns are traded here in the center. We see some more pawns being pushed forward. White has this 2 versus 1 pawn here on the queen side of the board, so white is certainly going to try to convert one of these pawns into a queen, and that could be very dangerous for black. So you'll notice that black has to start moving all of its pieces to the queen side, which black has done well. You'll notice the rooks kind of moving over here to the queen side, because this is a huge threat that really black needs to take control of earlier than later. The knight moves here, kind of stopping the control of this pawn. The other rook gets activated, a trade of rooks happened, and because of that trade, this pawn can be taken by black, and the other pawn is also taken. So we see quite a lot of moves here, and tfblade seems to have a much worse position, because now there is a majority for black. Black has a 1 versus 0 pawn, so that just kind of switched in an instant, which is definitely not something that you want to do. So if you're here as tfblade or in any position, when you have a majority like this, you want to start, you want to try to stick to it. So you want to move your pieces there, protect it, and that way you're going to be able to maybe make one of those into a queen, but we didn't see that happen in this game. The knight goes on a little journey, check happens, the knight moves, and here, again, white now has to go and be the person who tries to stop this pawn, whereas black is going to try to convert it into a win. We see a trade here, but that obviously takes advantage of the pin, and so now this rook falls, and from here, it's basically game over. This rook is just much more powerful. It can take this pawn, and obviously the pawn cannot move forward. You can't really defend it either, so white has a huge advantage here. But regardless, the game ended actually because of timeout. So black ran out of time in this position, and now we're going to move on to game 2. So game 2, Hafthor has the white pieces in this game, and from the start, he manages to get full control of the center. So if you're playing as black, fianchettoing the bishop is okay, but you need to make sure that eventually, preferably early on, you combat this center that white manages to get, because this is a very passive start. So you definitely want to start preparing some pushes here to just take away the center, and claim some space in the middle of the board for yourself, which is why e6 is a very powerful move, preparing this move. In fact, there's a trade that happens here, and after this trade, I think the bishop takes. After this trade, notice how weaker white's center now looks. Before it was like this, very strong. Now it already looks weaker. So tfblade managed to do a very nice, managed to play the opening very nicely, having a very powerful bishop on this diagonal, and also not really letting white fully take control of the center. In fact, he wins a pawn here with this fork, then he trades the queens immediately, and so it already seems like black has a really nice position, and then it gets even better because of this move. You see how powerful the bishop becomes. The knight comes out of here. Hafthor maybe doesn't see it. He just plays rook e1, trying to maybe make space for the knight to be captured. And obviously the bishop swings in onto b2, captures the pawn, and then captures the rook. So that's how powerful bishops on these long diagonals can really be. So you need to make sure to be careful of your opponent that decides to fianchetto the bishop, because it could really become bad for you. Now, here white realizes I'm down material, so my only real option here if I want to continue the game strong is to attack the king. I have quite a lot of pieces that are facing towards the king, so let me use them. He moves his knight here, beautiful move. Rather than moving away his pieces like here or just moving them away, he decides to bring more pieces while defending his pieces, something very strong if you're trying to attack. Here the rook moves away, now he can take this pawn. Now the bishops are traded, but before you take this bishop, look at how powerful this move is. The king moves, then you take the bishop. You already have possibilities here to do a very bad or a very good attack for you. And here there's this very nice discovery. You can't really win much. You only end up winning a pawn with it. But still, you have a very crushing position. And look at black's pieces. This is how dangerous it is. And dangerous it becomes if you don't develop your pieces. So that's a big lesson here. Make sure you focus on developing your pieces. And there were a lot of chances to do that. For example, if we go all the way back, why did black start moving his knight out here and attacking? I mean, this attack was, ended up working well, but if white, played the good moves, then this wouldn't be much. Instead, black should start focusing in this position to develop other pieces. So always make sure you focus on developing, unless you have an incredibly powerful attack, like, checkmate or winning like an absurd amount of material. Now here, you obviously, this we already saw. And then you get into a position where it seems like white has a better position just because of these 3 pawns that black lacks. I mean, these can just be killer pawns here on the board. He actually ends up winning the rook, and so Hafthor seems to just be winning. He ends up forcing a trade of the bishops, promotes a pawn, and I assume that you all know how the game is going to end. Hafthor wins the game here. In fact, he wins by resignation. Let's move on to game 3. So game 3, tfblade has the white pieces and begins the exact same way as game 1. And what you'll notice is that, again, I have the same comment. Usually, you're going to want to push c3, so maybe you want to move to d2 with the knight instead, but you do have the possibility to attack, and in fact, in this game, that's exactly what happened. White went and tried to attack this pawn. The only reasonable way to defend, Hafthor finds, which is great, and now we see a trade of bishops, and right after that, you're faced with this dilemma. Do you take with the bishop or with the knight? Well, this bishop is very powerful right now on this diagonal. This knight isn't doing much, so you definitely want to take with the knight. At least I would. You castle queenside. Everything seems so far relatively, standard. And now the knight gets pinned immediately after it develops. But that's not much of a threat unless you're worried about doubling your pawns. So if there isn't a queen here, maybe you want to address some time into fixing that. But if there's a queen here, it's completely fine if your opponent tries to trade. In fact, the queen here is way better than here. So already that's better. In fact, you already have a target. The knight goes there to defend the pawn. Notice that the knight could also go here to defend the pawn, but then you run into this fork. So it's a great choice moving the knight to h3. The pawns in the center start getting traded or pushed or whatever. The queens get traded, and we already see a very different endgame to what we're typically used to. And tfblade starts taking the pawns away from Hafthor. Hafthor has a very dangerous pawn here, and there doesn't seem to be a way to really stop this pawn, so you have to trade the knight for the pawn. The rook comes here. There is a beautiful way to stop it. Try to find it. It's obviously rook to b8. The rook can't move the file, not that it would want to, and obviously if you trade, you just promote. In the game, that's exactly what was played. You get a queen, and from here, it's just really losing. So tfblade manages to go, continue moving, and checkmate very quickly. So that's how the match ended. tfblade ends up winning the match. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys subscribe if you want more Pogchamps coming at you every single day, and peace out.